15. It still remains to consider the relation of a morphology of world history to philosophy. All genuine historical work is philosophy, unless it is mere ant-industry. But the operations of the systematic philosopher are subject to constant and serious error through his assuming the permanence of his results. He overlooks the fact that every thought lives in a historical world, and is therefore involved in the common destiny of mortality. He supposes that higher thought possesses an everlasting and unalterable objectiveness, Gegenstand, that the great questions of all epochs are identical, and that therefore they are capable, in the last analysis, of unique answers. But question and answer are here one, and the great questions are made great by the very fact that unequivocal answers to them are so passionately demanded, so that it is as life symbols only that they possess significance. There are no eternal truths. Every philosophy is the expression of its own and only its own time, and if by philosophy we mean effective philosophy, and not academic triflings about judgment forms, sense categories, and the like, no two ages possess the same philosophic intentions. The difference is not between perishable and imperishable doctrines, but between doctrines which live their day and doctrines which never live at all. The immortality of thoughts become is an illusion. The essential is what kind of man comes to expression in them. The greater the man, the truer the philosophy, with the inward truth that in a great work of art transcends all proof of its several elements, or even of their compatibility with one another. At highest, the philosophy may absorb the entire content of an epoch, realize it within itself, and then, embodying it in some grand form or personality, pass it on to be developed further and further. The scientific dress, or the mark of learning adopted by a philosophy, is here unimportant. Nothing is simpler than to make good poverty of ideas by founding a system. And even a good idea has little value when enunciated by a solemn ass. Only its necessity to life decides the eminence of a doctrine. For me, therefore, the test of value to be applied to a thinker is his eye for the great facts of his own time. Only this can settle whether he is merely a clever architect of systems and principles, versed in definitions and analyses, or whether it is the very soul of his time that speaks in his works and his intuitions. A philosopher who cannot grasp and command actuality as well will never be of the first rank. The pre-Socratics were merchants and politicians en grande. The desire to put his political ideas into practice in Syracuse nearly cost Plato his life, and it was the same Plato who discovered the set of geometrical theorems that enabled Euclid to build up the classical system of mathematics. Pascal, whom Nietzsche knows only as the broken Christian, Descartes, Leibniz, were the first mathematicians and technicians of their time. The great pre-Socratics of China, from Guanxi, about 670, to Confucius, 550 to 478, were statesmen, regents, lawgivers like Pythagoras and Parmenides, like Hobbes and Leibniz. With Lao Tzu, the opponent of all state authority and high politics, and the enthusiast of small, peaceful communities, unworldliness and deed shyness first appear, heralds of lecture room and study philosophy. But Lao Tzu was in his time the ancien régime of China, an exception in the midst of sturdy philosophers for whom epistemology meant the knowledge of the important relations of actual life. And herein I think all the philosophers of the newest age are open to a serious criticism. What they do not possess is real standing in actual life. Not one of them has intervened effectively either in higher politics, in the development of modern techniques, in matters of communication, in economics, or in any other big actuality with a single act or a single compelling idea. Not one of them counts in mathematics, in physics, in the science of government, even to the extent that Kant counted. Let us glance at other times. Confucius was several times a minister. Pythagoras was the organizer of an important political movement akin to the Cromwellian, the significance of which is even now far underestimated by classical researchers. Goethe, besides being a model executive minister, though lacking, alas, the operative sphere of a great state, was interested in the Suez and Panama canals, the dates of which he foresaw with accuracy, and their effects on the economy of the world, and he busied himself again and again with the question of American economic life and its reactions on the Old World, and with that of the dawning era of machine industry. Hobbes was one of the originators of the great plan of winning South America for England, and although in execution the plan went no further than the occupation of Jamaica, he has the glory of being one of the founders of the British colonial empire. Leibniz, without doubt the greatest intellect in Western philosophy, the founder of the differential calculus and the analysis situs, conceived or cooperated in a number of major political schemes, one of which was to relieve Germany by drawing the attention of Louis XIV to the importance of Egypt as a factor in French world policy. The ideas of the memorandum on this subject that he drew up for the Grand Monarch were so far in advance of their time, 1672, that it has been thought that Napoleon made use of them for his Eastern venture. Even thus early, Leibniz laid down the principle that Napoleon grasped more and more clearly after Wagram, viz., that acquisitions on the Rhine and in Belgium would not permanently better the position of France, and that the neck of Suez would one day be the key of world dominance. Doubtless the king was not equal to these deep political and strategic conceptions of the philosopher. Turning from men of this mould to the philosophers of today, one is dismayed and shamed. How poor their personalities, how commonplace their political and practical outlook. Why is it that the mere idea of calling upon one of them to prove his intellectual eminence in government, diplomacy, large-scale organization, or direction of any big colonial, commercial, or transport concern is enough to evoke our pity? And this insufficiency indicates not that they possess inwardness, but simply that they lack weight. I look round in vain for an instance in which a modern philosopher has made a name by even one deep or far-seeing pronouncement on an important question of the day. I see nothing but provincial opinions of the same kind as anyone else's. Whenever I take up a work by a modern thinker, I find myself asking, has he any idea whatever of the actualities of world politics, world city problems, capitalism, the future of the state, the relation of technics to the course of civilization, Russia, science? Goethe would have understood all this and revelled in it, but there is not one living philosopher capable of taking it in. This sense of actualities is, of course, not the same thing as the content of a philosophy, but, I repeat, it is an infallible symptom of its inward necessity, its fruitfulness, and its symbolic importance. We must allow ourselves no illusions as to the gravity of this negative result. It is palpable that we have lost sight of the final significance of effective philosophy. We confuse philosophy with preaching, with agitation, with novel writing, with lecture-room jargon. We have descended from the perspective of the bird to that of the frog. It has come to this, that the very possibility of a real philosophy of today and tomorrow is in question. If not, it were far better to become a colonist or an engineer, to do something, no matter what, that is true and real, than to chew over once more the old, dried-up themes under cover of an alleged new wave of philosophic thought. Far better to construct an aero-engine, than a new theory of apperception that is not wanted. Truly it is a poor life's work to restate once more, in slightly different terms, views of 100 predecessors on the will or on psychophysical parallelism. This may be a profession, but a philosophy it emphatically is not. A doctrine that does not attack and affect the life of the period in its inmost depths is no doctrine, and had better not be taught. And what was possible even yesterday is today at least not indispensable. To me, the depths and refinement of mathematical and physical theories are a joy. By comparison, the aesthete and the physiologist are fumblers. I would sooner have the fine, mind-begotten forms of a fast steamer, a steel structure, a precision lathe, the subtlety and elegance of many chemical and optical processes, than all the pickings and stealings of present-day arts and crafts, architecture and painting included. I prefer one Roman aqueduct to all Roman temples and statues. I love the Colosseum and the giant vault of the Palatine, for they display for me today, in the brown massiveness of their brick construction, the real Rome and the grand practical sense of her engineers. But it is a matter of indifference to me whether the empty and pretentious marblery of the Caesars, their rows of statuary, their friezes, their overloaded architraves, is preserved or not. Glance at some reconstruction of the imperial fora. Do we not find them the true counterpart of a modern international exhibition, obtrusive, bulky, empty, a boasting in materials and dimensions wholly alien to Periclean Greece and the Rococo alike, but exactly paralleled in the Egyptian modernism that is displayed in the ruins of Ramesses II, 1300 BC, at Luxor and Karnak? It was not for nothing that the genuine Roman despised the Græculus histrio, the kind of artist and the kind of philosopher to be found on the soil of Roman civilization. The time for art and philosophy had passed. They were exhausted, used up, superfluous, and his instinct for the realities of life told him so. One Roman law weighed more than all the lyrics and school metaphysics of the time together. And I maintain that today many an inventor, many a diplomat, many a financier is a sounder philosopher than all those who practice the dull craft of experimental psychology. This is a situation which regularly repeats itself at a certain historical level. It would have been absurd in a Roman of intellectual eminence, who might, as consul or praetor, lead armies, organize provinces, build cities and roads, or even be the princeps in Rome, to want to hatch out some new variant of post-Platonic school philosophy at Athens or Rhodes. Consequently, no one did so. It was not in harmony with the tendency of the age, and therefore it only attracted third-class men of the kind that always advances as far as the zeitgeist of the day before yesterday. It is a very grave question whether this stage has or has not set in for us already. A century of purely extensive effectiveness, excluding big artistic and metaphysical production, let us say frankly, an irreligious time which coincides exactly with the idea of the world city, is a time of decline. True, but we have not chosen this time. We cannot help it if we are born as men of the early winter of full civilization, instead of on the golden summit of a ripe culture, in a Phidias or a Mozart time. Everything depends on our seeing our own position, our destiny, clearly, on our realizing that though we may lie to ourselves about it, we cannot evade it. He who does not acknowledge this in his heart ceases to be counted among the men of his generation, and remains either a simpleton, a charlatan, or a pedant. Therefore, in approaching a problem of the present, one must begin by asking oneself, a question answered in advance by instinct in the case of the genuine adept, what today is possible, and what he must forbid himself. Only a very few of the problems of metaphysics are, so to say, allocated for solution to any epoch of thought. Even thus soon, a whole world separates Nietzsche's time, in which a last trace of Romanticism was still operative, from our own, which has shed every vestige of it. Systematic philosophy closes with the end of the 18th century. Kant put its utmost possibilities in forms both grand in themselves and, as a rule, final for the Western soul. He is followed, as Plato and Aristotle were followed, by a specifically megalopolitan philosophy that was not speculative but practical, irreligious, social-ethical. This philosophy, paralleled in the Chinese civilization by the schools of the Epicurean Yang Chu, the socialist Mo Ti, the pessimist Chuang Tzu, the positivist Mencius, and in the classical by the Cynics, the Cyrenaics, the Stoics, and the Epicureans, begins in the West with Schopenhauer, who is the first to make the will to life, creative life force, the centre of gravity of his thought, although the deeper tendency of his doctrine is obscured by his having, under the influence of a great tradition, maintained the obsolete distinctions of phenomena and things in themselves, and such like. It is the same creative will to life that was Schopenhauer-wise denied in Tristan and Darwin-wise asserted in Siegfried, that was brilliantly and theatrically formulated by Nietzsche in Zarathustra, that led the Hegelian Marx to an economic and the Malthusian Darwin to a biological hypothesis, which together have subtly transformed the world outlook of the Western megalopolis. And that produced a homogeneous series of tragedy conceptions extending from Hebel's Judith to Ibsen's Epilogue. It has embraced, therefore, all the possibilities of a true philosophy, and at the same time it has exhausted them. Systematic philosophy, then, lies immensely far behind us, and ethical has been wound up. But a third possibility, corresponding to the classical skepticism, still remains to the soul world of the present-day West, and it can be brought to light by the hitherto unknown methods of historical morphology. That which is a possibility is a necessity. The classical skepticism is ahistoric. It doubts by denying outright. But that of the West, if it is an inward necessity, a symbol of the autumn of our spirituality, is obliged to be historical through and through. Its solutions are got by treating everything as relative, as a historical phenomenon, and its procedure is psychological. Whereas the skeptic philosophy arose within Hellenism as the negation of philosophy, declaring philosophy to be purposeless, we, on the contrary, regard the history of philosophy as, in the last resort, philosophy's gravest theme. This is skepsis in the true sense, for whereas the Greek is led to renounce absolute standpoints by contempt for the intellectual past, we are led to do so by comprehension of that past as an organism. In this work it will be our task to sketch out this unphilosophical philosophy, the last that West Europe will know. Skepticism is the expression of a pure civilization, and it dissipates the world picture of the culture that has gone before. For us, its success will lie in resolving all the older problems into one, the genetic. The conviction that what is also has become, that the natural and cognizable is rooted in the historic, that the world, as the actual, is founded on an ego as the potential actualized, that the when and the how long hold as deep a secret as the what, leads directly to the fact that everything, whatever else it may be, must at any rate be the expression of something living. Cognitions and judgments, too, are acts of living men. The thinkers of the past conceived external actuality as produced by cognition and motiving ethical judgments. but to the thought of the future they are above all expressions and symbols. The morphology of world history becomes inevitably a universal symbolism. With that, the claim of higher thought to possess general and eternal truths falls to the ground. Truths are truths only in relation to a particular mankind. Thus, my own philosophy is able to express and reflect only the Western, as distinct from the classical, Indian or other, soul, and that soul only in its present civilized phase, by which its conception of the world, its practical range and its sphere of effect are specified.